Consciousness flickered in the chaos. Mother exhaled, whispered the spark to smolder, flare, blaze.
Welcome back to the In Her Image podcast, where we seek and celebrate our Mother God through scripture, scholarship, the arts, and everyday life. I am your host, Jess Burdett, and today I am joined by a poet, a writer, and English teacher. I've seen some of his works before here and there, and I'm really honored to have the privilege to speak with him and hear more of his story and how he came to write poetry about the goddess. Tyler Chadwick is his name. He was involved in writing Dove Song, and more recently he published Litany with Wings, and I'm hoping we get to hear some poetry today. So welcome, Tyler. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
Well, I am so excited to have you here. So how did you first begin thinking about the goddess, and what has discovering her been like for you? And then I'd love to get into how she has influenced your works. I'm guessing those might be intertwined.
Yeah, I've been trying to trace this back to the beginning moments. And the earliest thing I can think of is thinking of her from Eliza R. Snow's song, of course, A Mother There. Truth Eternal tells me I have a mother there. So thinking about that and what it might mean for our theology, I started thinking about that probably late 2000s into the 2010s. But it wasn't really until, I think, in 2014. I was preparing a talk for sacrament meeting. They asked me to talk about, I can't even remember what it was, living with God in our lives or something like that. And I came across Martin Polito and David Paulson's BYU Studies article, of course, and I was just taken with everything that was in there. And as I read it and got really familiar with the material and started thinking more and more about it, I wanted to incorporate thoughts of Heavenly Mother into the talk. So I started off with Joseph Smith's, if we don't comprehend the character of God, we can't comprehend ourselves. And I tied that into what that might mean to know the Father. But then I asked the question, but there's another figure we might not think as much about. And what might it mean to consider her and her character, so our Heavenly Mother. And so I worked that into the talk, which I wrote down and puzzled over for weeks. And I got up to speak, and I was really, really nervous because there was a member of the stake presidency there, and I was freaking out, like, oh no, I'm going to say Heavenly Mother, and what's going to happen, all that jazz. But as I stood to speak, I always get really nervous, but as I stood there and looked out at the congregation, just this amazing sense of peace washed over me, and I got this very strong sense that Mother was there and pleased with what I was doing, and that I had permission, quote unquote, to go ahead with what I was going to say. And so I spoke and talked about the character of Heavenly Mother in terms of what Polito and Polson say in their article. And I felt good about the talk. Afterwards, some people in the congregation said, oh, he liked to go for the deep stuff. But for me, it didn't feel very deep because I'd been thinking about it for a while. And just, I felt like that moment, it gave me permission to start thinking more about Heavenly Mother and her influence in my life, to start looking for her and considering like how I could, in some ways, give other people permission to think and speak about her as well by the same token. And I gave the talk in Pocatello. It was just before we were going to move back to where we live now in Ogden, because I was going to school up there, working on my PhD. And we moved back to Ogden. And a few weeks later, my daughters had a dance recital back in Pocatello. So I was up there with them. I'd curled their hair, my first experience with curling my daughter's long hair, and got them ready for the dance recital. And we got up there, and I remember it was either before or after, someone from our old ward came up to me and she hadn't been there the day that I spoke in church, but she said, it's like, I heard that you gave a really good talk in sacrament meeting a couple weeks ago. I said, yeah. And she leaned in and she looked around a little and she said, was it about Heavenly Mother? So she kind of whispered it like, oh, it's kind of scary thing. If you say it out loud, something's going to happen to you. And I said, yeah, it was. And she's like, oh, I think that's just really great, or something like that. And so it was like those really first two moments, again, that gave me a sense of, this is something that you could do with your voice, and you'd have the opportunity to, share that witness elsewhere, to give other people permission to start thinking about her. And so it's been, since that happened in 2014, almost actually 9 years ago to the day, pretty close actually. And I've been just thinking, I think about it quite often and consider how the feminine divine could influence our theology and our culture and our families, our homes in so many different ways. So that was kind of the beginning of it, and it continues to this day up through the compilation you were talking about, up through Dove Song, which was a pretty awesome experience. And then through my own book, which came out last April. So there's strains of all of that sort of follow through it. But those are the earliest two moments that I can think of really specifically seeking her, and giving myself permission to seek her more fully. So
I really relate to that. I had a similar experience in the beginning of my journey seeking Heavenly Mother, where I was writing a talk and my phone auto-corrected from he to she. And it was that verse, for God so loved the world that she,
yeah.
And that was it just like blew my mind. And I shared it in the talk. And then I shared a talk a little bit later. My next talk in sacrament meeting was on Mother's Day, and I talked about Heavenly Mother and had a really similar experience where I knew it was sort of groundbreaking in a way. Like, I had never heard her mentioned in a talk before, but similar reactions to the talk, and that just made me realize this is something good and needed. And so I love that we have that parallel in our stories.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So when did you start writing poetry, and when did you start including her in your poetry?
Oh, started writing poetry. Probably, I tinkered with it really when I started my undergraduate degree. So early 2000s, just after I got home from my mission. It's all really bad stuff, really, really bad, sort of preachy stuff that I wrote in my journal, didn't share with anybody. But I had my first poem published in Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought, in 2006. And that's kind of started my relationship with the world with Mormon poetry. I didn't know there was such a thing as that before I came across Dialogue. That was one thing that gave me permission to start thinking in terms of the relationship between poetry and my religious tradition. And I thought, hey, this is a really cool thing. And then as I started writing more and reading more, I was getting a poem ready for publication in another journal, Iriantum, which is published by the Association for Mormon Letters. It was defunct for a while, but it's back now. You can find it online. But it was probably 2010. I was writing a series of poems in response to some artwork by a Latter-day Saint artist, J. Kirk Richards, which is what a lot of my poems in this book are a response to. And he had a series of really small portraits of Christ, and I thought I was intrigued by them, just how they're gestural figures, so just sort of the outlines of his face and broad strokes. And I started thinking of the presentation of that in relation to the rosary. So praying the rosary, people would, you touch the beads, move along the beads as you're saying the prayer. So praying the rosary. And so I worked some of that imagery into the poem. And at one point I had said, I was talking about that and thought of God's rosary. I have the recent version here. It's something like these memories remembered laid down on lambskin scraps strung like shrunken heads on God's rosary. So God telling the rosary. And the features fingered dull through a Sibyl's eon, spent stroking the omniscience she inherited from her folks. So it's a she now, but when I originally wrote it, it was he. And as I was interacting with the editor, he pointed out, well, isn't a Sibyl female? And so shouldn't this pronoun here be she? So similar to your autocorrect of from he to she, and she gave her only begotten son. It was a moment of a realization like, oh, hey, why am I not writing about this? Why am I afraid to include a female pronoun in relation to God? So that was one of the first poems that I included Heavenly Mother in, and it started to spiral more outward from that.
So interesting. I feel like for a lot of us, it's just habitual. We're just used to talking about God as a he, and even once you sort of discover Heavenly Mother in your mind and like, okay, you know about her, it still takes conscious effort to include her and to change our way of speaking, because that's just what we're used to and like the water we swim in, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. That's the habits of thought we develop because of, like you say, the water we swim in. And for me, that's one thing that poetry does. It breaks me out of those well-worn ways of thinking about things, because it's a different form of language and it can help us connect with ideas and people in different ways. So in that moment, it was, oh, hey, it made total sense that it should be she, but I hadn't thought about it until then. So it cracked me out of that because of my interaction with that editor. So I'm grateful for that. I don't even remember who it was, but she opened something in me. So
I'm grateful for that too. Look what it started.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear more about Dove Song and your own book, Litany with Wings. So how did you come to be involved in Dove Song? How did that happen? I don't really know much of the story, although I've heard of the book.
Mm-hmm. Well, it started because I'd come across Marty's, the contest, a Mother Here contest, the art and poetry contest. And on my personal-ish blog, when blogging was a cool thing, I guess, I was doing some audio readings of the poems. So I'd record myself reading the poem, and then I'd do another recording of myself talking about it for 5 or so minutes, just thinking about what the poem could mean for our theology. And I'd done several of those, and I started thinking more about, wow, there's enough work out there. I wonder if we could collect this into an anthology. So I reached out to a poet friend of mine. It's actually my cousin as well, we discovered later, Dana Patterson, who co-edited the book with Marty and I. And I said, hey, what do you think about this? Because she'd been writing poems about the divine feminine and Heavenly Mother as well. And I said, what about this? And she said, well, I think that's a great idea, and I'm flattered that you would ask me. And I wonder if I think she said something that Marty may have already been working on an anthology. So I reached out to him with the idea, and I said, hey, what if we try to do something with this? And he was very generous with the work he'd already done and was happy to sort of, I think, have some other hands to help do the work. Because it's a big undertaking to try to collect and curate and put a compilation as big as Dove Song became together. And so it was just everything, I think, sort of came together there again. And I had reassurances again along the way, more divine reassurances, and Mother being, well, I felt that she was pleased with our efforts. Even though there were moments where I questioned it and had people who tried to discourage it because they felt like, oh, we shouldn't be doing this. It's not church sanctioned, quote unquote. So sort of along the lines of you're putting yourself your family in spiritual danger or something by focusing on this. But we forged ahead with it because of the many assurances that we had and conversations we had behind the scenes, that we just felt like, yeah, it's time for this. And this is something that we can do. So we gathered some poems that were already there, and then we put out a call for other poems, and people were very generous in sending along things that they had written that they felt fit within the theme. And so we were able to sort of gather a community around and within the book of people who were sort of sharing their poetic witness of the mother and their influence and of her influence in our lives. And so that was kind of the beginnings and the development of Dove Song, which it's probably one of the books I'm proudest of. I'm just blown away by by the generosity of the poets and by the amazing material that is throughout the book, that collects poems from the beginning. So W. Phelps' first mention of the mother in, I think it's 1843, or a long time ago, well before I was born, all the way up to when we published it in 2013. So there's a whole span of work in there with a little gap in the middle when we either couldn't find anything because of dearth of archives, or because it just wasn't very good. Didn't feel like it lived up to the standards of what other people had written and what we were including. So just so much amazing stuff that continues to come out. And I feel blessed and grateful to have been part of it and to give poets some kind of voice in offering that witness.
Oh, I love that. I loved your phrase, a poetic witness. That just is so profound and cool that you started that and that you created this amazing anthology and that it covered such a long period of time, all the way from Joseph Smith's day to ours. That's really amazing. So thank you for putting in all that work and for sharing the things that you have. We would love to hear some of your poems if you'd like to read some more.
Oh goodness, I was trying to find some that, let's see.
And we haven't talked too much yet about Litany with Wings, but there's some great ones in there as well about the goddess that I've been reading as I've been preparing for this conversation. I really loved Goddess in Repose and The Goddess Speaks. And I noticed that a lot of your pieces were inspired by, like you mentioned earlier, the artistic pieces of J. Kirk Richards, which is really fun because we just had him on the podcast. And so it's cool to have had this focus on his art and then looking at his stuff and preparing for that. And now to hear these pieces that were inspired by them is really neat. So I'd love to hear more about that too, if you have any more to share. So take it away.
Oh, so first of all, I guess just an introduction to Litany with Wings. It's a collection of my own poems. So I've edited 2 anthologies, Dove Song, which was published in 2013. No, it was 2018. Oh my goodness, I can't even, my years are, I'm a little foggy here. Yeah, 2018. I was way off there. And then the first anthology I did was Fire in the Pasture, which collects the work of some 82 poets writing out of the Mormon-ish tradition. And it was a pretty massive thing as well. They're both published by the same publisher. So I've published those 2 anthologies, giving kind of a voice to and cheerleading other poets in the Mormon community, which I really like to do. Whenever I get a chance, I like to put other people's work forward above my own. But Litany with Wings is a collection of my own poetry that spans 16 years of writing. So from the first poem I published in 2006 to up until the time it was published, I was reworking and put new poems in. So to 2002, so 16 years of work. And it really, it explores, if you look at it, it follows sort of a narrative arc-ish from the moment of creation to back again, the eternal round of creation and sort of everything in between. So in large part, it explores like what it means to have the presence of gods in our lives. And so the mother works throughout, she appears throughout the book, but there's a section at the end that's devoted entirely to her, called it the Psalter for the Eternal Mother. And a lot of them are sonnets written to the goddess. Some of them, 5 of them, appeared in Dove Song. And just so people know, I didn't choose those myself. Dana and Marty were the ones who got to choose. We chose each other's poems. So
that's smart.
And like you mentioned, a lot of the poems in the book do respond to J. Kirk Richards' work. And when I saw his goddess paintings, where he was painting about the feminine divine, it really struck something in me again. And I thought, hey, I want to respond to these. So I wrote several poems in response to his series of goddess stuff. Let's start off with, I'll read a couple of them. The first one you mentioned, actually I'll do the second one, The Goddess Speaks, which is after, funnily enough, The Goddess Speaks by J. Kirk Richards. That's what his poem is, or his image is titled. So The Goddess Speaks. Feel the pull of her words deep in your bones, in your goose flesh rising as her voice climbs the ancient staircase of your genes, footfalls rapping with the cosmos pulse, with the tangled hustle of stardust humming, throbbing, cracking worlds open, and the crowd come to bask into her open-air sermon on flesh and breath. Let her sermon gentle the body's erratic liturgy, its litany of DNA and longing. Watch her preaching swell into an infinite cathedral. See how the incense of her verbs tickles the pillars, how she singes the nave with her exegesis, how the chancel burns in the open canon of her glory. See how the flames halo at her touch, how they tongue her secrets, how they whisper your name. As I was writing that one, I envisioned kind of the competing sense of people feel like they have to be silent about the mother, that she doesn't say anything for herself, always speaking through or with the Father. But that painting really, it struck me in the sense that it's a woman standing in the middle of, if I'm remembering right, sort of a coliseum, like there's columns behind her, and there are people in front of her, and she's speaking, she's preaching. And I thought, what if we had this view of the mother? Like, what if we consciously gave her permission to speak? Like what would that feel like? And where can we hear her, if not in every congregation? Where does she come into our lives? And a lot of that came to me as like she speaks through our genes, through our DNA, through our sense of the world around us, that part of that is a creative act that she's continually involved in. And then the questions, the bunch of questions there at the end, kind of teasing at, so see, pay attention, listen up, we can see her everywhere in all of these things. So I guess that's my reading of the poem. I don't know how you responded to it or what you got from it, but
I loved it. I think I love most about all of your poetry that I've read is how it makes me feel. Like it just connects with something deep in me that feels true, and I just resonate with it. Some of the words go over my head even, but I'm like, yes, I resonate with this. And yeah, maybe we're not used to like consciously giving her a voice, but she does speak, and when we listen, she's all around. And I never realized, most of my life, I never realized that she had spoken to me, or that she had planted so many things around me that testified of her. But as I've opened my eyes and been able to see those, it is like this fire it's everywhere and all consuming. And I imagine she does have a powerful, beautiful voice, and she does use it, and we just have to tune ourselves in to be able to hear her. So yeah. I really liked that one.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate what you said about my poetry resonating with you. If I have a tendency in my poems to, like, I love playing around with and tinkering with the sounds of language. So sometimes my wife tells me, she's like, I don't get your poetry, which is just fine. But I'm glad to know that it's made you feel something along those lines. And as you're talking about her voice, I thought of something that we'd written. Dana, Marty, and I wrote in the introduction to the editor's preface to Dove Song about the voice of God that maybe we're used to hear in the Doctrine and Covenants and Isaiah here. It's the sound of rushing waters. So this deep sort of rush, this overpowering thing. And even I think we reference the voice of God in Moses's The Ten Commandments. This very, very deep, booming voice. So we're not used to, like you say, listening for something that's more feminine. And so what might that look like? And I feel like sort of two words that stick out to me from that poem right now are the Open-Canon of her glory, that it's not closed, because I mean, not much there's been plenty said about her from the pulpit, but there's nothing been definitively given necessarily. So it's still an open canon, and we as sort of apocryphal seekers of the mother, as it were, are adding to that canon all the time with our experiences, with our artwork, with our poems, with our prayers, our seeking, our conversations about her. And I kind of like being involved in that, even though it sort of happens in a lot of ways on the outside of mainstream discourse about God, at least in the church. But it's rising in a lot of places outside of the church, as well as inside the church. You hear more and more about the divine feminine coming from a lot of different places. So anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree that it's really exciting to be discovering her individually and collectively. It's really unique, with God the Father. There's even him, I guess we don't really know that much about, but we have a pretty clear picture in our mind, right? And like you mentioned, the voice in these movies and things, like we feel like we know who he is, even though maybe we really don't that much. But having this sort of blank slate on God the Mother is really exciting, because we can think about her as she relates to our own identity and gender and radical love, and just whatever things come up for each person.
Yeah. Well, and even like learning more about and thinking more about the feminine aspect of divinity that loops back around into, or well, at least it has for me, into my thinking about the Father God. So I start to see that God concept more in seeing it through the lens of the feminine divine. Like, so it's not just, okay, how does the presence of God the Father shape everything? So not the pronouns we use, the language we use to talk about God, but thinking about it vice versa. How does the feminine divine shape my view of the masculine divine? Because for me, it doesn't take away from it. It seems to soften and strengthen the masculine aspect a little more. Just like thinking about like my relationship with my wife, and thinking about Heavenly Mother and the relationship between Father God and Mother God can become sort of a way of projecting more heteronormative values onto people. But I think in some instances it can help us to, again, reshape what we think about masculinity and what masculinity is and what femininity is. And I was saying, to come back to my wife and me, the way that she softens me and I might soften her, that the interaction between those concepts of Mother God and Father God, it's kind of really exciting to me. And that's one thing that, as I've thought more about it, has softened and changed in my view of theology and Mormon theology and my own relationship with God. I don't see it as just me and Father, but as like me and Mother and me and Father and me and both of them and all of us. And so it's become more expansive in my mind along the way.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and to me it feels more complete. It's like if I knew about my grandpa my whole life and like knew a lot about his character and who he is and his stories, but never knew that he had a partner in that. And I didn't know anything about my grandmother and how she helped to like shape him, and he wouldn't be who he is without her. It's like this essential piece. I like thinking about it that way, that they just go together.
Yeah. Yeah. And that calls to mind a conversation I had with someone several years ago, because I was getting some flack for, I just mentioned, I was the Elders Quorum president, and I'd mentioned, Heavenly Mother and thinking about that. And some of the elders didn't take it so well. And I was talking to somebody else, and they were asking me, like, sort of to explain my approach. And I sort of argued that same thing that you just argued there, that, it expands. I can't see them separately. And he said, well, it doesn't matter that much to me to know that, I know that I have a Heavenly Mother, but to know more about her, I just don't have a desire to do that. And I understood the impulse, but it also kind of hurt me to hear someone say that, because I want my children to know both me and my wife, and to have a relationship with both of us. And I think they benefit from having that relationship. So why can't we think of it, turn around and think of that with God, that we benefit from having the presence of both of these deities in our theology, in our culture, in our lives. So it was another one of those moments where I was hurt by the interaction to begin with, but also sort of taken aback by that. Like, I don't need to know about Heavenly Mother. I know that I have one. That's all I need. It made me sad.
Yeah. It's so interesting to see the different reactions to talking about Heavenly Mother when people haven't much before. And sometimes I wonder if people don't want to broach the topic because it would bring pain of like if I found out I had this grandmother that I never knew my whole life, that would bring a lot of hurt and pain. And like, why didn't I get to know about her? Like, was she being kept from me? Like, and so it's kind of this, I don't know. I wonder if some people are like, I just would rather not even go there and not have the hurt or possible trauma of realizing like what's been happening.
Yeah. When I think you used the word trauma, that was the word that was going through my head as you were talking about that. The traumas that are sort of imposed on us by a system by so many systems that hold up one view of the male and what a leader should be and look like and all of those things. And things are changing, but it's still, there's so much of it ingrained in again, back to language. It's ingrained in our language, the ways and our concepts of God, and just all of those things, that it's so deeply ingrained that it afflicts some kind of trauma on our souls, I think, because part of the completeness of creation and life, I think Catherine Knight Sontag talks about this a lot in her work. We ignore that, and it inflicts trauma on us and on the earth and on our relationships and communities and all of those things. So I don't know where that gets us, but I mean, for me, it's a turn back to language. I have a PhD in English, and I teach first year writing, and a lot of these things that I think about in terms of my poetry and Mormon theology and the divine feminine and femininity and feminism. And I have 4 daughters at home and my wife, and my life is so shaped by them and their experiences. And I want them to be represented, and I want them to see representations of strong women. And so a lot of the things that I put forward to my students and in my writing and my thinking are all informed so much by my thinking about Heavenly Mother, and again, the divine feminine, and like different ways of using language that can snap us out of I don't know why I'm getting emotional thinking about this, but that can snap us out of how deeply ingrained we are in these concepts of who God is and should be. We need to crack ourselves out of that. And I think for me, at least, language is one of the most powerful ways to do that, because our lives are made up of language. Our species is grounded in language. We can't get away from that. And so if we can just snap out of our conventional ways of thinking about men and women and the relationships between men and women, I think it can change a lot. So for me, it's all grounded in language, how profound language can be. And that's where, again, the poetry comes in to, again, crack us out of those more codified ways of thinking and being and speaking, so that we can be together more profoundly and more holy. I guess in both senses of the term. Holy as in complete and holy as in sacred.
I love that. I just wish that we could go through it like as a giant mass.
I know.
As we keep doing this one by one thing, like an individual wakes up to it and changes their language and changes their perception, and now they're stuck in this water that we talked about earlier of everyone else still using the old language, and it can be painful. And I kind of don't blame people who can't abide it anymore, who are like, this isn't working for me, and they have to go elsewhere to feed their faith. So I'm like, hey, come on, everybody, we all need to do this together. But again, I wonder if in order for true healing to happen, you kind of have to be willing to face the hurt. Some aren't ready or willing to do that. I don't know.
Or to even know that it's possible, or that they can do it, because if they're stuck in a certain worldview that's, again, codified by the language and imagery that they encounter most often. They don't know. There's no way out of it unless they're open in some way to, like Alma's little seed. You plant that little seed in there and it will crack the heart open, and then grows into the mother tree that shapes us all. But again, it's
That's
just
so good.
Thinking that one by one, it has to be one by one. Wish it could be more than that. Like I get 4 classes a semester, so 92 students a semester. And I'm not teaching them, of course, about all of these things, but teaching them different ways of looking at language to help them think about it in different ways, so to plant the seed so they see language more expansively, and then go out and use that, and extends outward in their networks, I would hope. The whole concept of the mother tree shapes my writing and the way that I approach the classroom in ways that I sometimes lose patience with, because I want to be more influential. I want more people to just come into the shade of the mother tree. But it's like, how do I get there? Or do I? I just do it one by one. Just keep plugging along. One poem at a time, one essay at a time, whatever.
One podcast
episode at a time.
Well, I'm very grateful for your work, and so many people are doing this work too. So sometimes I have to remind myself.
Yeah.
It's not just me, and some people, God works in mysterious ways. Some people she's teaching by methods that I might not even see. So
I think that's part of the good work you're doing with the podcast as well, is getting it out there and the social media presence. So I know for me, it helps me, again, get that sense that, okay, there are other people out there doing this, and then it gives more people permission to do the same thing. So
yes, it starts this wave. So how has your relationship with Mother God changed and deepened? You shared some initial experiences with her, and kind of changing your language and starting to change or include her in your poetry. Like, how do you connect with her now, and how does she connect with you?
Well, one of the big things I think of is I think a lot about, as a word guy, I think a lot about Alma's Sermon on the Seed, the word being the seed growing into the tree, the mother tree. Thinking about and writing about that has changed and deepened, like I suggested, the ways that I try to use language as a broad system and on a word by word level. But it's also, like I also said, shaped my approach in the classroom. There's a very profound way in which I think my thinking about the divine feminine has shaped my approach to teaching. Even the fact that I decided to be a teacher and that I teach first year writing courses, which are often considered to be, oh, that's the women's job. I should be doing all the big research stuff. But I love teaching writing and these young students and encouraging them to think in ways that, again, break out of the convention. Introducing them to more feminine ways of thinking, more feminine logics, instead of the straightforward, present it A, B, C, the linear logics, and more circular, associative, and helping them to think about how their bodies shape their language and how they are in the world and how they move through the world and how they interact with other people. So I think from again, the initial seed that I had, giving myself permission to think more about it, it's blossomed into and is shaping continually who I am at home, who I am in the classroom, in my thinking and writing about language itself. So the roots are in there pretty deep, I think, in my heart, and it's blossoming, at least in my own understanding of the world, blossoming into something more expansive than I thought it could be. And it's become not just one small part of my world, but it's shaped so many different things. And I'm just realizing that now as I'm talking about this, how much those kind of ideas have influenced who I am elsewhere in my life. So.
Wow. That's so awesome that you're having that experience as you speak, as you testify. And our final question that we ask to all of our guests is, how has Heavenly Mother changed you? And I want to ask you that question and also give the invitation to read some more poetry, because I don't think we've heard quite enough yet.
Okay, fine. You twist my arm, I'll do it. The biggest thing, I'm gonna frame it this way: seeking the relationship, what it's changed in me is what I see now. I see things differently. I notice her absence a little more keenly. So when people are speaking and they reference, oh, our Heavenly Father and Jesus love us, I think in my head, yes, they do, but Mother does as well. And I find myself aching that if we could just tweak that little bit of language, and some people might not feel her absence so keenly, and there might be a little more sensitivity maybe elsewhere in the church especially. So that's one thing, seeking a relationship with her has changed in me. I see her absence more, but I also see her in more places, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, and referencing back to my approach in the classroom and my thinking about language, that's changed so many things that are still ongoing in my thinking about the work that I do as a husband and as a father, but also as a poet and as a teacher. So this continual trying to be open to how she can change me in those different ways, which I feel like she and Father would have me do.
Thank you. That's a beautiful answer.
All right, so some poems, I guess, now. One that I was thinking about, it's actually a part of a series within the book, Litany with Wings, it's titled Desiderata, or Things That We Desire, Collection of Desired Things. This is the 7th entry in it, and it's titled Goddess Mother. It's a list poem, so all it is just a collection of names or things that we might call the mother. So here it is, Goddess Mother, which is after Goddess Mother by J. Kirk Richards. O, Cosmos Maker, morning dove song, wing pulse over the waters, ripples of soul, stardust crowding toward epiphany, movements of mind brooding on the first whispers of life shivering the frontier, warmth of overturned soil, rain and fallow field, and petrichor, canyon's perpetual sigh, earth hum, ground sound, laryngeal click just before word rises into hearing, litany of elements foreshadowing birth, flutter of genesis and gestation, thrumming umbilicus, midwife's invocation, cosmos rending cry, shh, maker of milk, infinite breast, appetite and anticipation, cradle song, griot soothing divine restlessness. Once upon a time and times and half a time, mouth in the shape of awe, the body's envy and amen.
Wow. So, I love that. Just take the listener on a journey. It's also, I wanted to mention earlier, it's really different hearing you read it than just reading it for the first time on a screen or on paper. It's really beautiful hearing the voice that gave these words life actually speak them. So I'm really grateful to hear you read your own poems.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. Not many people ask for it, so it's not a daily occurrence in my life. One that's sticking out to me right now is Goddess Stirring Something Up. One thing I've noticed about a lot of these is that I was considering the role of the mother in the creative process. And this kind of sort of domesticates that as she is sort of in the process of creating worlds, but doing it as if she were stirring something in a bowl. So I'll read this one. It's After Goddess Stirring Something Up by J. Kirk Richards. Goddess stirring something up, folding light into cosmos the way her mother showed her an eon ago. Cradle the bowl between torso and forearm, the bowl's weight in one palm, divining rod clasped in the other, fold the mix to a loose whirl. Closing her eyes, she steps toward the memory, pauses, cocks her head to listen to the crack of life shifting the mixture. Her first time with the recipe, the crack shook the bowl from her grasp. Steady against the shift. Bowl to belly, lean into your mixing and keep vigil with the batter as it swells to emergence. Feel it clench just before release. Let it sputter. Let it pulse. Let it breathe.
That's a fun one. I like how they take you on like a journey. It's like a movie in your mind in just a few minutes.
I'm glad it takes you somewhere. That's good to hear. No others are really sticking out to me right now. Although, I keep coming back to the long one at the end. Long-ish one.
If you don't mind staying a few more minutes to read it, I would love to hear you read it.
I'm happy to. It's called Big Bang with Sternutation and Seer Stones. The sternutation being a sneeze. Now I want to preface this one with sort of a comment on, well, where that idea of the sternutation of the sneeze came from. I served my mission in New Zealand. And so among the Maori people, in their mythology, they have, it's like, well, the words are Tihe Moriora, and it means I sneeze, there is life. And so it's a reference to the first words spoken by the first woman. I sneeze and, oh, hey, here life comes out of this. So it's the breath of life, which works its way into Maori culture in a lot of different ways. But that inspired this poem here that thinks about the Big Bang as the sneeze with also some seer stones. So there's a combination of mythologies going on here. Anyway, Big Bang with sternutation and seer stones. 1. In the beginning, Mother worked Ilum into a loose sphere. A swirl of stray particles, stirred by the breeze blown through her studio window, circled her workbench, tickled her nose. She rubbed it, sneezed. Light filled the globe she held in her palm, seared it to a sea of glass and fire. She polished it marble smooth with her apron, then, calling Father to come see, balanced it on the brim of the universe, stepped back, watched it sputter, spin, orbit into the cosmos' overturned hat. 2. Faces pressed tight in the hat's mouth. Mother, Father watched the orb whirl, churn, effloresce, breathe. Their eyes burning with focus, they traced its off-kilter pirouette through the darkness, translating its circuit around their peeping into prophecy. Its respirations stirred their fervor, flooded their knowing with the promise and uncertainty of life sprawling across the sphere. Consciousness flickered in the chaos. Mother exhaled, whispered the spark to smolder, flare, blaze. 3. God bodies stirred in the burning. Peaked, Mother, Father leaned in, inhaled, ash whirling helical in their huffing, the whirl bearing the paired Adama. Dyad tingled fetal in red soil. Mother, Father praised the unfolding, prodded the bodies to sigh, to rise, to shake soot from saurian skin, to amble forth fever hot and hungry, and plunder the gods' orchard. 4. Baskets ripe with their picking, their take, the Adama, weary from reaching, looked Godward, stretched, sat against a tree. The orchard's dappled canopy, whispering like scales confessing the gods' oracles, gossiped with the harvest. Eavesdropping, the Adama, insatiate, palmed a droop, took a bite, breathed its sweetness, while mulling its flesh, its inebriating grace. 5. Fingering the droopstone, tracing the ancient and always unfolding breviary etched in the seed face, the Adama breathed in, 2, 3, 4, breathed out, 2, 3, 4, 5, blew open the cosmos. Emergence and movement murmured in the reverie. Mother, Father chatting in the next room, trilling laughter and let there be their gerunds palimpsest and penumbrae, life written on and written over, the groove of ritual and remembering, epiphanies and recurring dreams. Their conversation seared the droopstone, seared the open palm of the Adama's peeping. The seed cracked wide, sighed flaming tongues of quanta through the holy book of appetence and consciousness. The end.
Wow, there's just so much life in it. I'm so glad that you read that one. That was really, really beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing all those poems with us. It's such a treat to hear you read them and to experience them together. I hope that everyone who listens is just soaking it in and delights in these words that kind of give new life and possibility to Mother God and to her relationship with Father and their workings within us all. So thank you so much for all the inner work you've done, the outer work, and the things that you've shared and contributed to this work. It's been really a treat talking with you.
Oh yeah, very much so. Thank you so much for giving me some space to share things that I geek out about with every now and then. So actually all the time. I geek out about them all the time, if I'm being honest. So
Same. So where can people find you and your work? And also, what are you working on now? Do you have anything in the works?
You can find me online at a website, tyler-chadwick.com. You can find my books there, some other stuff about me. Also a digital companion for my book, Litany with Wings, which since it's so tied to visual art, I wanted something more visual that readers could turn to reference the paintings and other things that I'm talking about in the poems. So that's where you can find me online. I'm sometimes on social media. You can find that through my website as well. And right now, the biggest things that I'm working on are not so much poems right now, but I'm working on a bunch of essays in thinking about, again, Alma's Sermon on the Seed. One of them in particular explores the idea of the mother tree and how the concept of the divine feminine can help us reshape and rethink the ways we think about and use language. So I've been working on that essay for a little while. Presented it at a conference last year, end of last year, and I'm revising and expanding it, hopefully for publication somewhere. So that should be forthcoming here. I hope this year to get it out somewhere. So
great. I look forward to reading that. Well, thank you again so much. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it. And if you haven't yet, please leave us a review. If you'd like to support the podcast monetarily, you can make a monthly donation at anchor.fm/inherimage. We hope you'll tune in next Sunday for another inspiring episode.